Jet Airways shut down, Go Air is in NCLT, the government sold Air India to Tata Group, Vistara was merged with Air India, and this has left us with a duopoly of IndiGo and Air India controlling 90% of India's passenger aviation market. So the question is, how does it impact you? The cost of airline tickets in India have gone up by 43% in the last 5 years. And the data says exactly this. Airline passenger traffic has recovered from the pre-COVID levels to an all-time high, which is today 20% higher than what we had pre-COVID. Ever since the first flight has taken off, the airline industry has been a bottomless pit into which investors have been piling money. The legendary investor Warren Buffett, he has gone publicly and said that the airline industry is a shitty business, and yet despite the aviation industry being a shitty business, almost every tycoon wants to get involved. From Vijay Mallya to the Tata Group to the late Mr. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. So today we are going to do a breakdown on how Air India and IndiGo together control 90% share of India's 1.2 lakh crore passenger aviation market. Welcome to Breakdown. The Breakdown YouTube channel is part of the 01 network, which provides us with the resources, make this high quality production available to you on YouTube. And with this, back to today's breakdown. Let's begin by understanding the basics of the aviation industry. I'm going to ask you to think about the last airline ticket that you booked. You presumably went to an online travel agent, you found the route that you were going to take, you put in a few more parameters, and you had a selection of airlines. You picked the airline, you picked the flight, you may end up paying a little for extra baggage, you may have paid for a preferred seat, and if you were on a low-cost carrier, you may have opted for a paid meal. While 75% of revenue comes from ticket sales, 15% of revenue comes from ancillaries. Ancillaries include meal bookings, cabin upgrades, excess luggage. This is the core driver of revenue for the passenger aviation industry. When it comes to the costs, 18% of the operating cost of any airline is the crew and staff, 16% is any airport and navigation fees, 12% is a cost of sale and distribution, and this leaves us with the two biggest drivers of cost in the airline industry. ATF, which is airline turbine fuel, which accounts for about 25% of the cost, and then the lease, maintenance and depreciation of the airplane itself, which is a staggering 40% of the cost of operating an airline. The two key metrics in the airline industry, it is a load factor and the utilization. If 40% of the cost of an airline business is that fixed asset, it's very clear that the airline industry is a sweat your assets business, which is as long as that plane is flying and collecting ticket revenue, the airline will inch closer to profitability. The first metric, which is load factor, and load factor simply answers the question, of the seats that I make available, how many seats am I able to fill? Utilization means how many hours in the day is my plane flying and generating revenue. So utilization is expressed in the form of number of hours per day per aeroplane in the fleet. And therefore the best airlines not only have a high load factor, but they also have very high utilization. There are broadly two types of airlines. FSC, full service carriers like Air India, which would serve you a meal and give you luggage access, and low-cost carriers or LCCs like IndiGo, which are no-frills airlines. So the load factor for some of the best-in-class full-service airlines is about 90%. In the low-cost carriers, it is almost 95%. When it comes to utilization, the best-in-class for full-service carriers is 9 hours per day. For low-cost carriers, the best-in-class is 12 hours per day. We'll now begin with the history of the aviation industry in India. The first flight in India happened on the 18th of February 1911 when the British pilot and entrepreneur Henri Piquet took a flight from Allahabad to Naini, flying for just 10 kilometers. India's first airline was started by Tata Group and it was called Tata Airlines. The first flight was on 15th of November 1932 when the legendary JRD Tata himself flew the plane from Karachi to Mumbai And initially, Tata Airlines was focused on mail services, but it expanded to include passenger transport as well. So in 1946, it rebranded from Tata Airlines to Air India, and in the process, the government of India took a 49% significant minority stake in Air India. On 8th of June 1948, we had our first international flight, which was from Mumbai to London. Now 1950 to 1990 was the Raj era or the clampdown era, where honestly aviation went nowhere. On 28th May 1953, the government of India paid 2.8 crore rupees to buy out Tata Group's 51% ownership in Air India, and they labeled it as Air India International. They also went and paid approximately 3 crore rupees to the various owners of the 8 other domestic airlines and merged all of these into a single entity, which was called Indian Airlines. Barely anything happened until the 1990s. Now we're in the liberalization era. This is when the skies in India finally started to open. In April 1990, the Open Skies policy was passed, and this allowed private companies to run air taxis. It was until March 1994 that the Air Corporation Act was repealed, and now the private sector could not only fly air taxis, which is charter services, they could fly full-fledged commercial carriers. And this is where Jet Airways, Sahara, and several other names which started their operations. In 2005-2006, the next wave of private sector airlines emerged, like Go Air, IndiGo, Kingfisher, and SpiceJet. In the pre-COVID era, which is 2010 to 2020, India really started to take off. But before that, shit started to hit the fan. In 2012, Kingfisher Airlines, which had 70 aircrafts and 6,000 staff, ceased operations. In 2014, Tata Group made its first big foray into domestic airlines by launching Vistara with Singapore Airlines and Air Asia India with Air Asia Group. In 2019, another disaster struck. My personal favorite airlines, Jet Airways, shut down. And now the numbers about why India really took off between 2010 to 2020. In 2010, we had 7.75 crore passengers, 280 aircrafts, 80 operational airports. In a short span of 10 years, passenger count went almost 5x to 35 crore. Aeroplane count went 2.5x to 720 airplanes. We almost doubled our airport count to 140 operational airports. And obviously, when COVID hit, imagine that your revenue drops not by 9%, not by 90%. Your revenue drops to 0, and 40% of your total operating cost is still going out of your bank account every day as an interest payment, as a lease payment, as a hangar parking fee. Go Air landed up in NCLT and it is now bankrupt. This is also the era where the government of India operated Air India ran into serious problems. In October 2021, the peak loss in Air India was 20 crore rupees per day. And it is at this time that Tata Group took over Air India by paying 18,000 crore rupees. This is also the era where the late Mr. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala decided to enter the aviation industry by taking a significant 46% stake in Akasa Air, which is a low-cost carrier. The first flight of Akasa Air was on 7th August 2022 from Mumbai to Ahmedabad, and the late Big Bull actually sat on that plane. So the aviation industry has been on fire post-COVID. Go Air was an NCLT. Air India was acquired by Tata Group from the government of India. Air India went ahead and merged Vistara with Air India. Air India decided to hire a 26-year veteran of Singapore Airlines, Campbell Wilson, in July 2022. And this is where Air India and IndiGo began massive fleet orders. In February 2023, Air India placed the single largest order of aircrafts to date. 250 Airbus, 220 Boeing, and IndiGo said, "Hold my cheap coffee. We are going to place an order for 500 Airbus in June 2023. And in this post-COVID era, because of competition fading away and consolidation, which is that Vistara and Air India merged into the Air India brand, we are left with this duopoly, with IndiGo controlling 65% market share, Air India controlling 25% market share. This duopoly-like scenario is now showing positive signs in the financials of both IndiGo and Air India. So when you look at IndiGo's FY25 financials, it has reported 7,200 crore rupees of net profit on 80,000 crore rupees of revenue. And just to put this into context, 2 years ago, IndiGo was at 54,000 crore in revenue and was doing a 300 crore rupee net loss. It has swung from a net loss of 300 crore to a net annual profit of 7,500 crore. Air India, on the other hand, is not publicly listed. The numbers that we have come from various media reports. And Air India has also performed quite well. It has grown from about 51,000 crore of revenue in 2024, including the addition of Vistara, to 78,000 crore in the most recent financial year. And Tata's group level profitability gives it enough capital cushion to be able to sustain the Air India burn for a significant amount of time. And let's look at how this duopoly of IndiGo and Air India even came about. All the way back in 2010, Air India, which was then government operated, had a 20% market share and IndiGo had a 17% market share. Fast forward to 2020, Air India's market share had dropped from 20 to 12%. IndiGo's market share had grown from 17 to 48%. And today in 2025, post the Vistara Air India merger, Air India Group is at about 25% market share, IndiGo is at a 65% market share. Now you might say IndiGo is a low-cost carrier, Air India is a full-service carrier. They are not really competing against each other. But there is now a battle emerging between IndiGo and Air India. Air India, of course, has its low-cost carrier called Air India Express, but IndiGo itself is slowly transitioning from being a low-cost carrier to being a full-service carrier. In August 2024, IndiGo announced IndiGo Stretch, which is their equivalent to a business class. And last year, after taking over Vistara, Air India began a phased rollout of premium economy. Now, premium economy is a class that caters to business travelers like myself, whose company budget does not allow us to fly business, but who want the additional luggage, the priority onboarding, and the ability to deplane faster. And both Air India and IndiGo realized that the success of Jet Airways was also driven by its award-winning Jet Privilege loyalty program. So despite being an LCC, last year IndiGo launched its Blue Chips loyalty program, and Air India launched a revamped program called the Maharaja Club with Maharaja points after integrating Vistara into the Air India ecosystem. And this brings us to what next for civil aviation? What does this mean for you? The net takeaway for you, a passenger flying on any Indian carrier, is that you now have less choice because we've gone from 8 dominant airlines to 2 dominant airlines. So less choice, but more flexibility. But the caveat is this flexibility comes at a cost. Now, what do I mean by flexibility? Because we have 2 dominant airlines, you now have very strict or rigorous flight schedules. There's a very clear schedule on Air India where I can either take a 6:30 p.m. or an 8:30 p.m. or a 9:30 p.m. There is literally one Air India flight going from Bangalore to Mumbai every 75 to 90 minutes. And therefore, if you're flying on Air India or IndiGo and you are part of their loyalty program, you would get some discounts or perks for moving your flight in the schedule. And because these airlines are adding so many new aircrafts, you have a lot more frequent flights which will allow you to get to your destination faster, more comfortably. But this flexibility obviously comes at a price. In the last 5 years, airline price tickets have risen by almost 43%. You also need to understand that there is price inflation via the consumer price index every few years. And when you take a slightly longer window of 10 years, the consumer price index figure is at 193.5, which means over a 10-year window, there's been a 93.5% hike in prices. But when you look at the airline index, it is about 202.3. So what this means in simple words is that the increase in airline is more or less in line with the rise of costs across India, which is the CPI inflation index. So to close out, for the first time in many years, aviation in India has become a duopoly or a two-horse race. IndiGo leading with 65% market share and Air India with about 25% market share. And we're unlikely to see IndiGo or Air India disappear anytime soon. So what this means for flyers like you and I is that prices are not coming down anytime soon. We will have to pick a carrier and be loyal to them to accumulate reward points. And we will see way more routes emerging because the airlines are aggressively expanding their fleet and new airports are emerging. We hope you liked today's breakdown on India's 1.2 lakh crore passenger aviation industry. Please do hit the like button, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What was your first flight? That's all from us at Breakdown. Please do hit the bell icon so that you are notified about our next video. Thank you. Bye bye.